The Levadia Sanatorium, just outside Yalta, was a paradox of the Soviet system. Perched on the cliffs of the Black Sea, it was a palace of white marble and cypress groves, a relic of the Tsarist past repurposed for the proletarian elite. Here, party officials and decorated heroes of socialist labor came to rest their nerves, to breathe the curative salt air, and to be treated by the best physicians the state could provide. But beneath this veneer of therapeutic calm, the sanatorium held a second unspoken purpose. Section 7, a discreet wing carved into the bedrock beneath the main building, was not listed on any official diagram. It was a holding and processing center, a medical gray zone managed by the 9th Directorate of the KGB, but responsive to the needs of the GRU and the 5th Chief Directorate. Svetlana Ivanovna Petrova was a senior nurse in Section 7. She was 34 years old in the autumn of 1973, a woman of sharp, disciplined features and a quiet, almost invisible presence. Her life was a testament to Soviet ideals. Her father, Ivan Petrov, had been a signalman at Stalingrad and had come home a hero, his chest covered in medals and his lungs scarred by German chemicals. He had raised her on stories of sacrifice, duty, and the unbreachable fortress of the Rodina. Svetlana believed in this fortress. She had been a member of the Komsomol, and her party file was immaculate. She was trusted. Her work was precise and demanding. The patients in Section 7 were not elderly apparat chicks recovering from heart strain. They were special contingencies. They were diplomats who had heard too much, scientists who had thought too much, and defectors who had run in the wrong direction. Svetlana's job was to keep them stable. Sometimes this meant stabilizing them for interrogation, sometimes for a prisoner exchange, and sometimes it meant stabilizing them for a quiet, medically documented final complication. She understood her role. She was a cog in the great machine, and the machine kept the people safe. On October 12, 1973, a new patient arrived. This was not the usual transfer from Lubyanka or Lefortovo. This one came via a military transport from the Turkish border, under heavy sedation and guarded by two grim-faced GRU officers. The paperwork was sparse, classified at the highest level. Designation, Patient 4 Alpha. His file listed him as a foreign intelligence operative, captured during an act of state-sponsored sabotage. Major Kireyev, the political officer and de facto administrator of Section 7, met Svetlana in the sterile corridor. Kireyev was a man who seemed perpetually damp, with a soft handshake and eyes that never blinked. "Svetlana Ivanovna," he said, his voice a low monotone. "This one is of particular interest. GRU protocols are in effect. He is a high-value American asset. His parachute failed to deploy correctly over the Caucasus. He has significant internal injuries, a compound fracture of the femur, and severe concussion." Svetlana nodded, her gaze fixed on the middle distance, a habit of professional deference. "I will prepare the trauma bay, Major." "You will do more than that," Kireyev said, stopping her. "You will be his sole source caregiver. You, and you alone, will administer all medications. You will log all vital signs. You will be the only one he sees, aside from the guards." He paused. "The GRU team will arrive in 1 week. They need him conscious, but pliable. His full recovery is not a strategic objective. Do you understand the distinction?" Svetlana understood. It was an order wrapped in the language of medical discretion. She was not to heal him. She was to manage him, keep the asset viable, but ensure the man remained broken. The patient was brought in. Even unconscious, he was different. Taller than most of the men she treated, with a build that spoke of different training. His face was a map of bruises, but beneath the damage, his features were sharp, angular. His hair was a dark, matted brown. He was, she noted with clinical detachment, younger than she had expected. "His name," Kireyev said, reading from the manifest, "is Thomas Hayes, a cultural attaché, according to his cover." "We know better." Svetlana Ivanovna Petrova nodded. She put on her sterile gloves, checked the morphine drips, and prepared the plaster for his leg. He was Patient 4 Alpha. He was the enemy. And she was a good Soviet nurse. The first 3 days were a blur of medical procedure. Thomas Hayes drifted in a fog of delirium and state-administered sedatives. He had a fever that spiked dangerously, a consequence of the internal trauma and the non-sterile conditions of his capture. Svetlana was meticulous. She cleaned his wounds, administered the state-provided antibiotics, and set his leg in a heavy plaster cast. She worked with an efficient, detached professionalism, logging every milliliter of fluid, every change in temperature, every mumbled word. She followed Kireyev's orders precisely. The pain medication was kept at a level that would prevent shock, but was just shy of providing true comfort. The experimental vitamins she was ordered to add to his IV drip were a heavy-dose cocktail of psychotropics designed to induce confusion and dependency. She documented it all in her logbook, using the correct medical codes. Protocol 8. Cognitive dampening. Hayes's delirium was filled with English, a language she only partially understood from her state schooling. But the tone was universal. He spoke in sharp commands, then in soft murmurs. On the fourth night, as she was adjusting his saline drip, he suddenly grabbed her wrist. His eyes were open, but they were not seeing her. They were seeing a rain-soaked street in Berlin or a safe house in Ankara. "Anna," he whispered, his voice rough. "The package is lost. You have to—" "The bridge. Go to the bridge." Svetlana froze. It was the first time he had shown any sign of coherence, however flawed. His grip was surprisingly strong. She did not pull away. Instead, she spoke in the same calm, neutralizing tone she used with all her patients. "You are in a safe place," she said in Russian. "You must rest." His eyes focused, just for a second. The blue was startlingly clear. He saw her, the white cap, the sterile room, the Cyrillic letters on the chart at the foot of his bed. The realization dawned. He let go of her wrist as if it were a hot coal. He said nothing, but his breathing changed. The delirium was replaced by a new, sharp awareness, the awareness of a man who had woken up on the wrong side of the world. This incident was the first crack. It was an early sign, though she would not recognize it as such. Her duty was to report this change in consciousness to Major Kireyev. She documented in her log. Patient exhibited moment of lucidity at 0217. Spoke one word, Anna. Sedation increased as per protocol. But she omitted the grip. She omitted the flash of intellect, the moment of human-to-human recognition. She told herself it was an irrelevant detail. The sexot, the secret informer on her floor, a sharp-faced orderly named Zenaida, was always watching. Zenaida had made a point of noting how much time Svetlana was spending with 4 Alpha. "He is a strong one," Zenaida had commented, her thin lips barely moving. "Perhaps too strong for his own good. The Major is very interested in your progress." Svetlana merely nodded and continued her rounds. But that night, she did something outside of protocol. Before administering the evening dose of the vitamins, she diluted the mixture with a small amount of saline. Just a fraction. It was not a conscious act of sabotage. It was, she rationalized, a medical adjustment. A patient showing such rapid cognitive return might react poorly to the full dose. It was a prognostic decision. But as she made the adjustment, she felt a tremor in her hand. It was the first time in her career that her hand had ever trembled. It was an early sign of a different kind of fever. The GRU interrogation team was delayed. A snowstorm in the Urals had grounded their flight. This left Svetlana in an unforeseen position. Her orders were to keep Hayes pliable for a team that was not coming. For 7 more days, she was alone with him. The silence of Section 7 broken only by the hum of the ventilation and the distant clang of a guard's boot. With the diluted medication, Hayes's mind began to clear. The fever broke. The fog of the psychotropics receded, leaving behind a sharp, assessing intelligence. He was a professional. He knew where he was, broadly, and he knew his situation was dire. He also knew that the woman treating him was his only link to the world. He began to talk, not about secrets. He never mentioned Anna or the bridge again. He started small. "Water," he said one afternoon, his voice still a rasp. Svetlana brought him the cup with the metal straw, as she had done a dozen times. He drank, his eyes watching her over the rim. "Thank you," he said, in perfect, if accented Russian. Svetlana stopped. She had been taught they were monsters, saboteurs, Ideological fanatics who spoke only in code and lies. She had not expected, "Thank you." "It is my duty," she replied, her voice stiff. "Your duty is comprehensive," he said, gesturing vaguely to his complex cast and the IV stand. She said nothing, busying herself with the chart. "In Yalta," he said, changing the subject, "they say the air is good for the lungs." "It is curative," she replied mechanically. "I can smell the sea," he said. "Or maybe it's just the disinfectant. They smell similar." A small, involuntary smile almost touched Svetlana's lips. She suppressed it instantly. "You should not talk. You need your strength." "For what?" he asked, the question genuine. "My visitors?" This hit too close. "For recovery," she said, the lie tasting like ash. The discovery was not a single event. It was a slow accretion of these small moments. It was the discovery that Patient 4 Alpha was not an abstract enemy, but a man who watched a small bird, a wagtail, that landed on the reinforced window ledge. A man who winced when she changed the dressing on his shoulder, but who never made a sound. One evening, driven by a compulsion she could not name, Svetlana went to the Section 7 archives. It was a small, locked room containing the operational files of all current contingencies. As senior nurse, she had a key. She told herself she needed to cross-reference his medication allergies. She found the file. Hayes, Thomas N. CIA, Special Activities Division. It was thick. It contained grainy surveillance photos of him in Vienna, in civilian clothes, laughing with a woman. It contained lists of his known associates, his service record, a place called Vietnam, his psychological profile. The profile was clinical. High intelligence, high pain tolerance, prone to chivalrous or protective impulses, ideologically motivated. A true believer in the Western model. Svetlana stared at the phrase, true believer. She, too, was a true believer. But the file also contained an addendum from the GRU. Asset is responsible for the disappearance of 3 Soviet assets in Istanbul, considered extremely dangerous. Liquidation authorized upon extraction of intelligence. She closed the file, her hands cold. She was tending to a man marked for disposal. The man in the bed was not just an enemy, he was a person. A person who liked birds, who spoke polite Russian, and who was, according to this file, considered dangerous enough to be ended. This discovery changed the chemical balance of her world. The black and white of her father's patriotism was dissolving into a terrifying, unfamiliar gray. The walls of Section 7 had more than just ears. They had microphones, pressure plates, and, most effectively, human eyes. The moment Svetlana's interactions with Patient 4 Alpha began to deviate from the established norm, the system took notice. The first indication was Zenaida, the orderly. Zenaida, who had failed to qualify for nursing school, harbored a specific acid resentment for Svetlana's quiet competence. She began to find reasons to be in room 4, assisting Svetlana with tasks that did not require 2 people. "Let me help you turn him, Svetlana Ivanovna," Zenaida would offer, her voice syrupy. "He is heavy, an American pig, fed on too much corn." Hayes, who understood perfectly, would remain passive, his eyes closed. But Svetlana felt the tension. She felt Zenaida's gaze as she changed the IV, watching to see if her hands lingered. "The major is asking why the patient's sedative consumption has decreased," Zenaida remarked one day, while ostensibly cleaning the light fixture. "He is worried about the comfort of our guest. His tolerance is building," Svetlana replied, her voice even. "I am titrating the dose to maintain efficacy without organ toxicity. It is all in the log." "Of course," Zenaida said. "You are always so precise." Svetlana knew her logs were being audited, but she also knew that the hidden microphones were her most dangerous adversary. She could no longer speak freely, even in Russian. She and Hayes developed a new language, one that existed beneath the threshold of surveillance. It was a language of objects. When his food tray arrived, she would arrange the small piece of black bread on the left side of the plate. It meant, "Be careful today, they are watching." If it was on the right, it meant, "The corridor is clear." He would respond in kind. If he left his water cup half full, it was a question. "Are you all right?" If it was empty, it meant, "I understand." This silent, coded communication became their only reality. One day, Svetlana brought in her own lunch, a small, hard apple. She placed it on his bedside table. It was a flagrant breach of protocol. Outside food was forbidden. It was a gift, an act of profound and profoundly foolish humanity. He looked at the apple, then at her. He didn't touch it. "It is a test," he whispered, his first words in days. "For your superiors." "No," she whispered back, her heart pounding. "It is an apple." He picked it up, turned it in his hands, and took a bite. The sound was deafening in the sterile room. That evening, Major Kirayev summoned her to his office. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and floor wax. A small bust of Dzerzhinsky stared at her from his desk. "Svetlana Ivanovna," Kirayev began, not looking at her. He was studying a file, her file. "Your record is exemplary. Your father was a great man, a true patriot. It would be a shame to see that legacy tarnished." "I do not understand, Major." "Patient 4 Alpha," he said, his voice flat. "Your reports indicate he is recovering. Too well. His cognitive function is listed as near baseline. This is not what we discussed. His constitution is strong, Major. I am merely following medical procedures." Kirayev's eyes finally met hers. They were cold, like chips of gray granite. "The GRU team is confirmed. They will be here in 48 hours. They are impatient. They do not want a strong patient. They want a broken one. I trust you will adjust your medical procedures accordingly. Do not disappoint the state, Nurse Petrova. The state does not forget." The surveillance was no longer passive. It was a threat. Zenaida's reports, the microphones, the logs, it was all converging. Svetlana left the office, the major's words echoing in her ears. She knew what "adjust your procedures" meant. It meant the time for dilution and saline was over. The GRU team arrived 2 days later, not as a team, but as a single terrifying man. Colonel Vashin was a legend in the 1st Chief Directorate, a man who had debriefed high-level defectors in the West and was known for his ability to dismantle a human psyche without leaving a single visible mark. He was tall, gaunt, and wore an immaculate uniform that seemed one size too large. He reviewed Hayes's file in Kirayev's office, sipping tea. For 3 days, Section 7 was locked down. Svetlana was ordered to remain on call, but was not allowed near Room 4. She could hear nothing, but the silence was worse. The normal sounds of the sanatorium, the distant orderlies, the hum of the autoclave, were gone. There was only the oppressive heavy presence of Vashin's interview. Guards were posted at both ends of the hall. Zenaida was sent to work in the main wing. Svetlana waited, her stomach a knot of acidic dread. She tried to read Pushkin in her small quarters, but the words blurred. She thought of the apple. She thought of the true believer in the file. On the 3rd evening, Vashin emerged. He looked precisely the same. He did not look at Svetlana as he passed her in the hall. He went directly to Kirayev's office. An hour later, Svetlana was summoned. When she entered, Vashin was gone. Only Kirayev remained, but he was a changed man. His usual damp calm was gone, replaced by a pasty, nervous agitation. He was smoking, a breach of his own rules. The debriefing is complete, Kirayev said, stubbing out the cigarette. Colonel Vashin is dissatisfied. The asset is compromised. Svetlana's blood ran cold. Compromised? The asset's mine. Kirayev snapped, irritated. It is non-responsive. Colonel Vashin believes the cognitive dampening protocols were over-administered. He believes the asset is now useless. Svetlana stared. Her act of mercy, diluting the drugs, had backfired in a way she could never have imagined. By not breaking Hayes's mind, she had preserved it. Vashin, expecting a pliable, confused subject, had instead met the full, unyielding force of Thomas Hayes's training. He had held firm, and Vashin, unable to admit his own failure to crack the American, had blamed the protocols. He had blamed her, indirectly. The asset is now a liability, Kirayev continued, his voice regaining its bureaucratic chill. He knows too much about this facility. He has seen you. He has seen me. He cannot be traded. He cannot be held. And he cannot be He opened a small metal box on his desk. He removed a single glass vial, sealed with a red wax cap. It contained a clear liquid. "This is a confrontation of loyalties, Nurse Petrova." This was it. The moment she had dreaded since her father first told her about the enemies of the people. "The patient's internal injuries have worsened," Kireev said, reciting a script. "His heart is failing. Tomorrow morning at 07 hours, you will administer this. It is a potassium chloride solution, highly concentrated. It will stop his heart instantly. The autopsy will confirm cardiac arrest due to complications from internal trauma. You will sign the chart. I will sign the death certificate." Svetlana looked at the vial. It was so small, a simple, clinical solution. "This is not a medical procedure," she whispered. Kireev's face hardened. He stood up, towering over her. "This is a state procedure. This is your final duty to the Rodina. Are you a patriot like your father? Or are you a sentimentalist? A traitor?" The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "Take it." Svetlana's hand, the one that had trembled days before, was now perfectly steady. She picked up the vial. It was cool to the touch. "At 07 Rao," Kireev repeated. "And Svetlana Ivanovna, I will be outside the door. Zenaida will be with me to provide support, to provide witness, to ensure the directive was followed." Svetlana nodded, her face a mask of professional obedience. "I understand, Major. For the Rodina." She left the office, the vial heavy in her pocket, a cold, small point of glass pressing against her side. Svetlana did not return to her quarters. She went to the pharmacy. As senior nurse, she had keys. The pharmacy was her domain, a place of precise order, of solutions and substances. She looked at the vial in her hand. Potassium chloride. Clean. Efficient. Untraceable in a man with Hayes's injuries. She had a choice, a simple, binary choice. Follow the order, and she would remain Nurse Petrova, a trusted servant of the state. Her father's legacy would be intact. A man would be gone, but he was the enemy, was he not? Or she could refuse. And that was not a choice. That was a sentence. A sentence to a sharashka, a camp or a shallow grave. But her mind was working on a third track, a nurse's track. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't an executioner. She was a healer. She looked at the shelves. There were other substances, anesthetics, paralytics, drugs that mimicked the state of cessation, but were not. She found what she was looking for. Succinylcholine, a powerful, short-acting neuromuscular blocker. In a high dose, it would induce total paralysis, including the diaphragm. Breathing would stop. The pulse would become thready, almost undetectable. It would look like cardiac arrest, but it was temporary. In 20 minutes, the effect would begin to fade, provided the patient was ventilated. She drew a precise dose into a syringe. She took another, identical syringe and filled it with the potassium chloride. She labeled neither. She put them both in her pocket. She had made a choice. It was not a choice for him. It was a choice for her. She would not be the person Major Kireev wanted her to be. At 0650, she walked to room 4. The guard outside the door nodded. He had his orders. At 0655, Major Kireev arrived, with Zenaida at his side. Zenaida carried a small metal tray, as if for a routine procedure. Her eyes were bright with a kind of morbid, pious excitement. "We are ready, Nurse Petrova," Kireev said. Svetlana entered the room. Hayes was awake. He had not slept. He looked at her, and his training kicked in. He saw her face, the tightness around her mouth. He saw Kireev and Zenaida through the small window in the door. He knew. He didn't plead. He didn't beg. He simply watched her. "Svetlana," he whispered, using her name for the first time. She put her finger to her lips. She prepared his arm, her movements swift, clinical. Kireev and Zenaida were watching through the glass. She held the 2 identical syringes in her left hand, hidden from the door by her own body. She had to choose, the real one, or the false one. In that second, she thought of her father. He had run into a burning building to save his radio, an act of duty. She thought of Hayes, sketching a bird on a napkin. An act of life. Her hand moved. She palmed one syringe and injected the other. Hayes's body tensed. His eyes widened, not in pain but in surprise. A look of betrayal or confusion. Then his muscles went slack. His jaw fell open. His breathing, which had been shallow, stopped completely. Svetlana put her stethoscope to his chest. Silence. She checked his carotid artery. Nothing. She turned to the window, her face a perfect blank mask. "Time of cessation," she said, her voice clear and cold. 0703. The patient is gone. Karayev nodded, a small, tight smile of relief. Zenaita's face was a mask of smug satisfaction. Karayev made a note on his clipboard and slid the observation panel shut. "Excellent work, nurse. Zenaita will help you prepare the body for the morgue." He walked away. The problem was solved. Svetlana was alone with Hayes's still unmoving body. She had done it. She had exposed her own soul to save his. But Zenaita entered the room. "I will get the gurney," she said. But she was looking at Svetlana. "You are very calm, Svetlana Ivanovna. Most nurses, they feel something, even for an enemy." "He was just a patient," Svetlana said, cleaning the injection site. Zenaita's sharp eyes darted to the small medical waste bin. She saw the syringe. Then she looked at the other one, which Svetlana had hastily pocketed. 2 syringes. "Yes," Zenaita said, her voice suddenly different. "Just a patient." She left the room, but she did not go toward the morgue. She went toward the administrative wing. Svetlana had 30 seconds. She grabbed the ambu bag, the manual ventilator from the emergency cart. She put the mask over Hayes's face and began to pump, forcing air into his paralyzed lungs. "Breathe," she commanded the unmoving man. "Breathe, you fool." The door opened. It was not Zenaita. It was Karayev, his face purple with rage, flanked by 2 armed guards. Zenaita was behind him, pointing. "Treason!" she shrieked. "She used a paralytic! He is alive!" Svetlana looked up from the ambu bag, her hand still pumping, still giving life. She had been exposed. The choice was complete. The arrest was instant. Svetlana Petrova was not taken to a standard holding cell. She was taken to the one place in Section 7 she had never seen, the sub-basement. It was a single, windowless room, lined with acoustic tiles. The air was cold and damp. The only furniture was a heavy metal table and 3 chairs. Her interrogation began immediately. This was not a trial. A trial implies a crime has been committed against the law. This was an inquiry. A crime had been committed against the system, and the system was the sole judge. The interrogator was not Kirayev. Kirayev was now a material witness, his own career hanging by the thread Zenaita had pulled. The interrogator was a man from the 5th Directorate, flown in from Simferopol. He introduced himself only as the Reader. The Reader was a pale man in an ill-fitting suit. He never raised his voice. He used no physical intimidation. His methods were purely psychological, designed to unravel the very fabric of her Soviet identity. "Let us begin, Svetlana Ivanovna," he said, opening a new file. "We are not here to discuss what you did. The facts are clear. You substituted a non-lethal agent for a state-mandated directive. You attempted to preserve the life of an enemy operative. We are here to discuss why." He slid a blank sheet of paper in front of her. "Write down the names of your American contacts." "I have no contacts," she said, her voice hoarse. "Of course you do. No one does this for sentiment. That is a Western decadence. Were you recruited in Yalta, or was it earlier, at university?" For the first 12 hours, the questions were relentless, circular. They were designed to make her doubt her own memory. "Your father," the Reader said, sipping his tea. "A hero." He was gassed. "Did he ever speak of the Germans with affection? Did he teach you to pity the enemy?" "He taught me duty." "Your duty was to Major Kirayev. Your duty was to the state. You failed. Why? Did Hayes promise you money? A new life in America? Did he seduce you?" Svetlana flinched. The charge was so crude, so far from the silent, desperate connection they had shared. "He was my patient. I took an oath. You took an oath? The reader laughed, a dry, coughing sound. You took no oath. You are a state employee. Your only oath is to the party, and you spat on it. For what? For a man who came here to destroy us. The second day, they used the conveyor method. The reader left, and Kiriev was brought in. He looked broken. Svetlana, he pleaded, just tell them. Tell them he put you under a spell. Tell them he used psychological tricks. It is your only way out. Say you were coerced. Svetlana saw the trap. If she admitted to coercion, she was admitting Hayes was still a functional, powerful agent, making Kiriev's failure and Vashin's even more profound. I acted alone, she said. Then Zenaida was brought in. Her testimony was a masterpiece of spiteful observation. She was always watching him. She smiled at him. I saw her. She gave him an apple. She brought decadent Western sentiment into a state facility. On the third day, Svetlana was weak from lack of sleep. The reader returned. We have a problem, he said calmly. Patient 4 Alpha. Mr. Hayes. He is gone. Svetlana's head snapped up. Oh, not gone, the reader clarified. He has been transferred to a more secure facility in Moscow. Colonel Vashin was displeased. Your actions have caused a significant interagency disturbance. The GRU is furious. You have made a powerful enemy, Nurse Petrova. He let this sink in. She hadn't saved him. She had only complicated his file. So, we are left with you, the reader said, leaning in. A traitor with no leverage, a nurse who thought she was more important than the state. There is no trial for you, Svetlana Ivanovna, only a diagnosis. He pushed a form across the table. It was a medical transfer. You are unwell, the reader said. Your father's heroism, the stress of your position, it has caused an acute ideological stress disorder. You are a danger to yourself and the state. You require rest and re-education. It was a non-person sentence. She would not be executed. She would be erased. Her party membership revoked. Her nursing license voided. Her name struck from the Yalta registry. She was declared mentally unfit. It was the system's final perfect cruelty. Her act of conscience was officially categorized as an act of insanity. The consequences of Svetlana's choice rippled outward, quiet and devastating. For Thomas Hayes, he was, as the reader had indicated, transferred. He was taken, still weak from the paralytic and his original injuries, by a special KGB transport to Moscow. He was no longer a GRU or CIA asset. He was a political problem. He was taken to Lefortovo prison, a place that specialized in ideological prisoners. He was held in total isolation for 18 months. His debriefings were no longer about sabotage, but about the nurse. They wanted to know, in minute detail, how she had been turned. His insistence that she had not been turned, that it was an act of simple humanity, was met with disbelief. It was the one truth the Soviet system could not process. In 1975, in a quiet, unpublicized move, he was traded on the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin for a high-level Soviet mole captured in London. He returned to America a changed man, haunted by the memory of a woman's face and the rhythmic sound of an ambu bag. For Major Karayev, he was ruined, not for ordering an extrajudicial ending, but for failing to control his own subordinate. He was found guilty of lax political discipline and failure to identify an ideological contaminant. He was stripped of his rank, his party membership, and his pension. He was transferred to a meteorological station in Tixi, above the Arctic Circle, to monitor weather balloons. He was never heard from again. For Zenaida, she was rewarded. She was promoted to senior nurse of Section 7. She was given Svetlana's old quarters, her salary was doubled, and she was awarded a medal for vigilance in state security. She became a tyrant in the wing, reporting on doctors and orderlies for the slightest deviation. She had learned the system's core lesson. Loyalty was not about patriotism. It was about a useful and timely betrayal. For Svetlana Petrova, her diagnosis was her damnation. She was put on a train. There was no trial, no sentencing, just a medical transfer order. She was sent to the Kazakh SSR, to a small dusty town on the edge of the shrinking Aral Sea. The town, once a fishing port, was now miles from the toxic, receding waterline. She was assigned to a Feldshire clinic, a one-room concrete box that served the local cotton farmers. Her life was reduced to the barest essentials. She was no longer Svetlana Ivanovna Petrova, senior nurse. She was Svetlana, the quiet, mad woman from the West. She was not imprisoned, but she was not free. She was under permanent propiska, internal passport restrictions. She could not leave the district. She had to report to the local militia office once a week. Her job was to treat cotton-related lung ailments and agricultural injuries. She was efficient. She was calm. She was hollowed out. She never spoke of Yalta. She never mentioned the Black Sea. She learned to live in the flat, endless, dusty brown of the steppe. She had traded the beauty of the Crimea for this inland wasteland. It was the price for a single, impulsive act of conscience. Years dissolved into decades. The 1970s gave way to the stagnant 1980s. Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko. The great machine of the Soviet Union began to groan, its gears rusted and stressed. In her small clinic in Kazakhstan, Svetlana watched the news on a flickering black and white television. She saw the new words: glasnost, perestroika. A new leader, Gorbachev, who spoke of human values. Svetlana was now in her 50s. Her hair was gray, her face lined by the sun and the dust. She was a fixture in the town, respected for her medical skill, but still an outsider. The mad nurse label had faded, replaced by the quiet one. She had delivered 2 generations of children, set bones, and comforted the dying. She had, in her own way, rebuilt a life. But it was a life lived in the shadow of 1973. Then, in 1991, the world broke. The August coup, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the fortress she had been raised to believe in, the one her father had defended, had crumbled from within. Kazakhstan declared its independence. The borders, once iron, were now porous. In the winter of 1992, a letter arrived. It was a thin, strange-looking envelope, covered in colorful stamps. It was not a Soviet envelope. It was postmarked Arlington, Virginia, USA. The local postmistress, who had steamed open every piece of mail for 20 years, handed it to Svetlana with a look of awe. Svetlana opened it with trembling hands. The letter inside was short, written in English, which she could no longer read. She took it to the local school teacher, an old woman who had secretly taught the language, and asked her to translate. The school teacher read, "Svetlana Ivanovna, I do not know if you will ever receive this. I have been searching for you since 1975. The Red Cross was finally able to locate a S. Petrova in your region. I am alive. I am well. I have a family. I work for the State Department at a desk. They don't let me jump out of planes anymore. I do not know what happened to you. I do not know if you were punished or praised. I only know that I am alive because of you. I often think of Yalta. I never forgot the cypress trees, or the sound of the sea I could not see. Thank you. That is all. Thomas." The school teacher looked up, her eyes wet. "Who is this Thomas, Svetlana?" Svetlana took the letter. An old patient. That night, Svetlana Petrova walked out into the cold steppe. The Aral Sea was gone, but the salt flats glittered in the moonlight. She read the letter again, though she could not understand the words, only their meaning. Her legacy was not in the files of the KGB. It was not in the lies of Zenaida or the failure of Kiryev. Her legacy was this single, impossible piece of paper. It was the validation that her insanity had, in fact, been the most rational act of her life. She went back to her small house, built a fire in her stove, and carefully fed the letter to the flames. She did not burn it out of fear. The state that had hunted her was gone. She burned it because it was hers. The connection was private. The file was, at last, closed. The case of nurse Svetlana Petrova is not recorded in the official histories of the Cold War. It was not a geopolitical pivot. It was a minor, internal disturbance, quickly and efficiently cauterized by the apparat. The event was a failure, not of espionage, but of ideology. The Cold War was a conflict predicated on the dehumanization of the other. The enemy was a symbol, an abstract. The communist automaton, the capitalist warmonger. The system relied on its cogs, like Svetlana, to see only the symbol, not the person. Svetlana's failure was her inability to maintain this abstraction. The proximity required by her role as a nurse was the system's critical error. She was ordered to touch the enemy, to care for his physical needs. In doing so, the ideological construct of patient 4 alpha was dissolved by the human reality of Thomas Hayes. Her choice was not, in the end, a political one. It was a professional one. She refused to weaponize her medical skill. She chose the oath she had not taken, the Hippocratic over the one she had, the parties. This case file illustrates the inherent vulnerability of a system that demands total ideological compliance. It reveals that the true battleground was not always in the Fulda Gap or the missile silos of Cuba, but in the quiet, sterile rooms where individual consciences were tested. Major Kureyev believed he was testing Svetlana's loyalty to the state. In truth, he was testing the state's power against the fundamental apolitical impulse of human empathy. He and the system he represented lost. Svetlana Petrova paid an immense price for her actions. She lost her home, her career, her nation, and her identity. But in that sub-basement interrogation room, by refusing to name her act as anything other than her own, she achieved a singular private victory. She saved her own humanity. In the great cold calculus of the ideological war, hers was the variable that could not be solved, the stubborn, irrational, and unbreachable sovereignty of the individual soul.